So thank you so much for joining me on this interview for the study called An Examination of Personality Expression in Everyday Life in a Canadian Sample of Racialized Undergraduate Students by Joanne M, Chung et al. So we're going to start by introducing yourself. I'd like to know your name, your year of study, your program, and racial identity.
Yeah, so thank you so much for having me. My name is Andre Ardona. I'm in my fourth year of study. I'm doing a double major in psychology and sociology. And as for my racial identity, I would say that I'm Filipino Canadian.
To begin, I'll go through the overview of the study. So according to the study, a sample of racialized undergraduate students from UTM reported experience that suggests that their personality expression differs depending on whether they're in public or private spaces on a daily basis. For example, participants adjusted their behavior in public to be more careful, more agreeable, and to show more enthusiasm. Interestingly, when racialized students were in private spaces or with others of the same ethnic background, their personality expression differed, raising the possibility that they were less likely to adjust their behavior when by themselves or with similar others, also known as code switching. What are your thoughts about this study?
Yeah, so I really liked it. That's really vague, but I'll get into like the specifics. As a psychology and sociology student, one thing that I kind of noticed is that there's more of like a heavy emphasis and like focus on how racial identity affects daily life in sociology. And in psychology, it's something that we kind of look at less often. So I was really happy to see that, it was like the prominent variable of the study. And there's a lot of things that surprised me. For example, there was one part of the study where I think they found that some people were more extroverted and like more conscientious when they were in like predominantly white spaces. And I thought that was really interesting because like the kind of idea that I went into the study with was, people might be more shy when they're with people that are not like of a similar
Mhm.
race or of the same background. But what it actually like suggested was that it's kind of the opposite for some people, and the reason that might be is because people kind of want to break stereotypes of like certain races acting certain ways or
That's
and stuff
true.
like that, and that they just kind of feel pressure to, put on a better face, I guess, and to like
Mhm.
give the best impression that they can. So things like that were really interesting for me. And like I
Yeah.
said, it was really refreshing to see a psychology study that, looked at racial identity. So I really liked that.
So now we're going to go into code switching. To briefly go over it, it's a technique used by minority groups where they are not just changing their behavior, but they're changing their behavior to fit in with a dominant group based on their environment. So, for example, being in the classroom versus being at home, code switching technically ensures that you don't feel ostracized and excluded. Was there ever a time that you used code switching to navigate through an interaction?
Sometimes I'm in places where, I'm like one of the only Southeast Asians, and it kind of it does add some pressure of like how am I supposed to act? And like related to the something I said in the last point, I think there's kind of this impression that Asian men are kind of like less outgoing and stuff like that. So
Mhm.
there is pressure for me sometimes to kind of act against that stereotype.
Uh,
Um yeah.
um, okay, so for our next question, which is also in section two, this basically is what we were talking about. So, do you feel like racial and ethnic cues are predictors for your personality expression? For example, when you're surrounded by, let's say, majority white folks, or you're experiencing any form of discrimination in specific situations, do you think that affects how extroverted or how conscientious or how open or even how agreeable you are? So, just to give you a reminder, openness relates to how down to earth someone is. Conscientiousness relates to being responsible, careful, and diligent. Extroversion relates to expressing positive emotions, being social, talkative, and energetic, like how you may be more extroverted during a job interview or for like this instance, for the job you currently have. And agreeableness is related to being friendly, cooperative, compassionate, and trusting. So just to reiterate the question, do you believe that cues related to your race and your ethnicity can be used to predict how you're going to express yourself?
I do find myself kind of switching like, personalities based on certain racial and ethnic cues, again, based on like the certain types of people I'm around and like feeling the pressure again to break those stereotypes of like how, Asian men might be like a little more reserved. So not only with like certain groups, and I know I did say certain groups, but what I mean by that is like basically anybody outside of like my circles, there is a pressure to act a certain way and to put on a certain face. And I do get cognizant of certain, um, stereotypes or whatever. And there are certain times where I do feel my race more. Um, in high school, I was on my wrestling team. I was like the only Southeast Asian. There is nobody else who is Southeast Asian. And people kind of, I did feel like a sense of I don't want to say like discrimination, but I did feel ostracized. Like for example, there's this
Mm-hmm.
Chinese American basketball player named Jeremy Lin, and I was called Jeremy Lin at a wrestling tournament where
Oh
that
my
doesn't
gosh.
even like there's like
There's
before one
no
of my matches,
correlation.
there's no
Mm-hmm.
correlation. I'm not even Chinese,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm
Mm-hmm.
Asian, and like being the only Southeast Asian and moreover one of the only East Asians, I guess people saw that as an opportunity to kind of, poke some fun at that. And
Mm-hmm.
I was of course a vulnerable group or a vulnerable person in that situation. So those kind of moments, which I also experienced while playing basketball, where I was called like Yao Ming or Jeremy Lin. And again, I'm not Chinese, I'm like Filipino.
Mm-hmm.
But it does make me more conscious of like how I present myself, especially in sports situations now where again I might be the only Southeast Asian or the only East Asian presenting person.
Mm-hmm.
There's like pressure to perform and kind of like be more dominant and like put my foot down as soon as possible just to like kind of communicate to other people like like
Mm-hmm.
I just want to have a fun time, but that would
Yeah.
entail me being more extroverted, being more um conscientious in a way because like I would have to show like more effort on the court or whatever. I don't experience that and there's like less of a chance I experience something like that. So yeah.
It's like now you have to adjust yourself even more because they're comparing you to like the greats, basically. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's not
Yeah.
really fair. This actually leads to my next question that has to do with like authenticity.
Hmm.
So what the researchers found in this study is that when racialized individuals are in private versus public domains, their authenticity differs, leaving racialized people feeling ingenuine. When I say authenticity, I'm talking about how you feel about the way you are. So, do you feel like how you show your true self is different when in private domains, such as your home, versus when in public domains, such as school?
The special thing about Canada is that it's such a melting pot that it
Mm-hmm.
really adds so much complexity to how you present yourself in like different situations. I'll definitely
Mm-hmm.
say that there is a disconnect between, who I am when I step out of my house or like when I'm with close friends, versus when I'm at places like school. I kind of see myself as like a mockingjay or whatever. Like I'll just pick
Mm-hmm.
up on I'll try to pick up on like how other people are within like a
Mm-hmm.
certain context. Like if I'm in a group where people kind of have like that Toronto man thing going, like then I'll switch to that. I'll try to switch to using the slang and like the accent a little bit.
Oh,
But then
yes.
if I'm like working at my job, for example, then I'll talk maybe a little more like how I'm talking with you now, where I'm like very clear and I'm trying to talking like whatever like I don't like I forgot the exact terminology, but like standard quote unquote English. There's definitely a huge disconnect between like who I am behind closed doors and then who I am when I step outside of my house. I would say like um when I'm with like my friends, especially with my girlfriend, I'll speak my mind like there's no other like there's no end. In the context of the study where we're talking about race, um like like I was telling you, there is pressure to act in certain ways in certain situations. For example, when I'm playing sports or whatever, to to, live up to certain expectations, or even in some cases to defy expectations. I think this is a good opportunity to talk about this. When growing up, I live in a place called Malton, and there's not Southeast Asians are kind of are a minority, and like East Asians in general.
Mhm.
So I don't know if this is the reason that I felt like out of place at school, but when I look back, I noticed that like in elementary school and for a large part of high school, I was really shy, and I didn't engage in any sports. And that might be because, there's just less confidence to step on a court where you're not like with those quote unquote like similar others.
Mhm.
It's such a, testosterone filled competitive space. You would rather just like be surrounded by people that look like you and who kind of
Mhm.
understand your culture and stuff like that. So it was daunting at first to ever play any sports. And when I did eventually try to play sports in high school, there was I don't know, again, I don't know if it was my race or if it was my personality or if it was a combination of the two, which very well this study might kind of be alluding to, that it might be like there is an interplay between those things. But when I did step on like sporting environments for the first time, there is pressure to perform really good because people's expectations of me are already low, and they're kind of reluctant to accept me into that environment because I don't look like them. So there is pressure to like kind of, be better, um,
Mhm.
be more extroverted, be more assertive, um, and in some instances be more agreeable. If I want
Mhm.
to stay on the basketball court or whatever, just saying like, yeah, let's do that, and just being like nice at certain times when I know that those certain people, like certain people with certain personalities would, want me to be more agreeable, but then also understanding that there are some people who want me to be more extroverted and stuff like that. So yeah, it's a really interesting question. And yeah, that's my answer.
Okay, well, that leads to our final question. Is there anything you would like to see included in future studies for personality expression of racialized emerging adults?
Yeah, so I think I read this as a recommendation at the end of the paper.
Hmm.
I think 79% of the participants were female. Um,
Hmm.
I think it would be really interesting to, and I'm sure st other studies have done this, but it'd be really interesting to see like the gender dynamics. I think both
Hmm.
like men, women, non-binary people, like people of all different gender expressions will have different experiences on like their
Yes.
personality, and how they have to change it. Like for example, there might be a situation where a racialized guy might feel the need to be more extroverted to kind of like reassert his place as, a respectable like masculine figure. But there
Hmm.
in that same situation, a female identifying person might feel the pressure to be more agreeable and, come off as more reserved and like,
That's
yeah.
true.
So things like that. And, on a further point, I think looking at people who with queer gender identities would be like really, really interesting because
Hmm.
it's of course a developing field of study, and getting to know what experiences that they go through in terms of their personality. It must be so like complicated. And
Yeah.
I don't want to make any assumptions on like what it is, but I don't think it's an unsafe assumption to say that I'm sure it's very, very nuanced and novel. Um, so I think that would be interesting to look at too.
Cool. Perfect. All right. So I guess I'll leave you from here. Again, thank you
Yeah,
so much for being a
thank
part of
you.
this interview.